On March 3, 2001, the Veterans Memorial Auditorium in Columbus, Ohio, was completely packed. Around 4,000 fans filled every single seat to watch one of the most anticipated editions of the Arnold Sports Festival. But that night, no one realized they were about to witness a moment that would redefine the standard of modern bodybuilding. This wasn't just another Arnold classic. It was the perfect stage for history to be made. At that point, Ronnie Coleman was already a three-time Mr. Olympia champion. He dominated the sport. He was the most feared name on the circuit, and interestingly enough, he hadn't even planned on competing at the Arnold that year. For many people, he had nothing left to prove. When you're already sitting on top of the world, why take the risk? The answer came down to incentive. Beyond the $100,000 prize purse, a massive amount of money at the time, there was something even more symbolic on the line. A brand new Hummer H1, valued at about $105,000. This wasn't just cash. It was status. It was spectacle. It was the Arnold raising the bar and turning the show into something bigger than ever. But something even greater was at stake. If Ronnie won that night, he would become the first athlete in history to win the Mr. Olympia and the Arnold Classic in the same year. Not Lee Haney, not Dorian Yates. Two absolute legends of the previous era never accomplished that feat. What was on the line wasn't just a trophy or a luxury SUV. It was the chance to carve his name into a category reserved strictly for legends. When Ronnie Coleman stepped on stage that afternoon in Columbus, it became obvious within seconds that something was different. He wasn't the heaviest he had ever been. In fact, he came in lighter, weighing between 247 and 250 pounds. That's roughly 112 to 113 kilograms. He was noticeably lighter than at the previous Olympia, where he had reached around 263 pounds, or 119 kilograms. That strategic drop changed everything. Coming in lighter wasn't a sign of weakness. It was precision. The result was what many still consider the best physique of Ronnie's entire career. The combination of density, symmetry, and conditioning hit a level that almost didn't look real. It was extreme muscle mass, but refined. Absurd size, but controlled. The highlights were impossible to ignore. His biceps displayed towering peaks, full and deeply etched. His back was so wide and thick it looked like it swallowed half the stage. His quads showed deep separation, every line visible under the lights. And then there were the glutes, so sharply conditioned they became a talking point for years. The level of detail was so extreme that some people joked it looked digitally enhanced. That leads to one of the most curious stories in bodybuilding lore. Ronnie later claimed that Flex magazine had to tone down his photos because he looked too shredded. According to him, the conditioning, especially in his glutes and hamstrings, was so unreal that editors were worried people would think the images were fake. Think about that for a second. A physique so dialed in that it had to be softened to seem believable. His dominance during prejudging was so overwhelming that some fans reportedly left the auditorium before the finals even started. There was no suspense, no real debate. It felt inevitable. While Ronnie's victory seemed locked in, the battle for the rest of the podium was anything but simple. The official results placed Ronnie Coleman in first, Chris Cormier in second, Dennis James in third, King Kamali in fourth, Dexter Jackson in fifth, and Craig Titus rounding out the top six. But those final placements don't tell the whole story. Every spot came with tension, strategy, and sky-high expectations. Chris Cormier entered the show riding momentum from recent wins and full confidence. Weighing about 263 pounds, around 119 kilograms, he brought a beautifully balanced physique with classic lines and impressive size. Many believed he was the only man who could truly challenge Ronnie. But on stage, he looked slightly flat, missing that explosive three-dimensional pop that Coleman delivered. He was outstanding, but not historic. Dennis James stepped on stage at roughly 258 pounds, about 117 kilograms, showcasing raw mass and intimidating density, especially from the front. His size commanded attention. However, his conditioning simply wasn't on the same level as the champion. King Kamali brought something different: energy, charisma, presence. He turned every pose into a performance and knew how to fire up the crowd. Dexter Jackson, still early in his journey to the top, displayed refined aesthetics and razor-sharp conditioning, the kind that would eventually earn him the nickname The Blade. But on that night, he still appeared smaller standing next to the mass monsters of the extreme size era. Then came the quiet war for 6th place. Craig Titus and Melvin Anthony went head-to-head in a razor-thin battle decided by the smallest margin of points. It was size versus aesthetics, density versus flow. In the end, Titus secured the final spot in the last post out. The top 6 was locked in, but behind that result was something even more impressive than what we saw under the lights. Because a physique at that level isn't built in a single night. It's crafted long before the stage, away from the spotlight, away from the crowd, away from the applause. Every tiny detail separating those athletes came from months, sometimes years, of meticulous preparation. To show up at the 2001 Arnold Classic in the best shape of his life, Ronnie Coleman didn't rely on luck. He relied on strategy. Eating somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 calories a day, he fueled nearly 250 pounds of lean muscle, about 113 kilograms, with surgical precision. Sounds like a lot. To maintain that kind of mass and still walk on stage peeled, it was simply what the job required. The protein intake was wild. Around 600 grams per day. That's roughly 1.3 pounds of protein daily, or about 21 ounces. The staples were simple: egg whites, chicken breast, and filet mignon. Nothing fancy, nothing gourmet. Just repetition, consistency, and discipline on a brutal level. Carbs were just as straightforward: white rice, potatoes, and oatmeal. As the show got closer, those carbs were adjusted carefully to dial in maximum conditioning. Every gram mattered. Every meal was calculated. And then there was one detail that became almost legendary: breakfast with grits, the classic Southern staple, mixed with egg whites and sometimes a little cheese. Even in extreme contest prep, he kept that ritual. For Ronnie, mental comfort was part of the strategy. When you're living in physical war mode for months, small routines become anchors that keep you grounded. Maybe the most impressive part? Cardio sessions often started at 3 or 4 in the morning, while most of the world was still asleep. Hitting absolute peak condition in March looked like an undeniable victory, until the calendar became a factor. In professional bodybuilding, the Arnold Classic kicks off the season, while the Mr. Olympia usually happens months later. Peaking that early isn't just an advantage, it can be a gamble. Ronnie himself later admitted he may have pushed his body to its absolute limit too soon in 2001. Holding that kind of extreme conditioning for months isn't easy. The human body isn't built to stay in stage-ready shape for long stretches. Strict dieting, intense cardio, heavy training, it all adds up. And eventually, the bill comes due. By the time October rolled around and the Olympia stage was set, Ronnie was still the reigning champion. But something felt different. For the first time in years, the threat felt real. And that threat had a name: Jay Cutler. Big, full, aggressive on stage, Jay brought a physique that split opinions and put serious pressure on Coleman's reign. The final decision gave Ronnie the win once again. But the debate exploded among fans and experts. Many still consider the 2001 Olympia one of the most controversial calls in bodybuilding history. Some argue Ronnie clearly deserved it. Others believe Jay could have walked away with the title that night. And you, where would you stand? Shifting back to the 2001 Arnold Classic, while the spotlight focused on the men's showdown, the Ms. International delivered an elite-level spectacle of its own. At that time, the women's division was still split by weight classes, which made the strategy even more intense. Each athlete had to win her class before even thinking about the overall title. And that year proved women's bodybuilding was in a fiercely competitive era. In the lightweight division, Diana Cadeau took the win. Technical, dense, and extremely well-conditioned, she edged out her competition in a tight battle. That victory marked a major milestone in her career and solidified her name among the top athletes of the era. In the heavyweight division, Vicky Gates dominated. Strong, mature, and incredibly consistent, she showed exactly why she had been building a historic run at the Arnold. When the two class champions faced off for the overall, Vicky came out on top and claimed the overall title. It was her third straight Arnold victory, winning in 1999, 2000, and 2001. A streak that showcased both stability and technical superiority at the highest level. It's important to remember that in 2001, the figure division didn't even exist at the Arnold Classic. It wouldn't be introduced until 2003, and when it finally arrived, It completely reshaped the landscape of women's competitions in the years that followed. At that time, the spotlight was mainly shared between traditional bodybuilding and fitness, which also had a major presence at the festival. Speaking of fitness, the 2001 Fitness International title went to Jenny Worth. She brought together an athletic physique with high-level choreography, blending strength and performance in a way that perfectly fit the spirit of the event. By then, the Arnold had already evolved beyond a simple bodybuilding show. It had become a true multi-discipline spectacle, where strength, aesthetics, and stage performance all shared the same spotlight. And the spectacle didn't stay confined to the main stage. In one of the most unique moments of the night, the top 6 stepped off the stage and into the stands, holding their pose down right in the middle of the crowd. It was unusual, almost surreal. The best physiques in the world just inches away from the fans, posing, smiling, interacting. At that point, it wasn't just a competition anymore. It was an experience. It was history unfolding in real time. Ronnie took that interaction even further. When it was time to officially announce the winner, he was slow to make his way back to the stage. He was shaking hands, taking pictures, soaking in every second. It felt like he already knew that night was too special to rush. This wasn't just another win. It was a personal milestone. Then came one of the most symbolic moments in the event's history. Arnold Schwarzenegger stepped on stage to present the Lifetime Achievement Award to his mentor, Reg Park. On one side stood the man who inspired Arnold. On the other stood Arnold himself, who went on to inspire generations. And right there beside them was Ronnie, the dominant champion of a new era. 3 historic generations sharing the same stage. How often does history line up like that? Before the night wrapped up, Arnold asked the question everyone wanted answered. Would Ronnie return in 2002 to defend his title? Ronnie delivered the perfect cinematic response. I'll be back. As legendary as the 2001 Arnold Classic was, there's one detail that makes the story even more intriguing. The lineup could have been even deeper. Flex Wheeler and Lee Priest had to withdraw for medical reasons shortly before the event. 2 massive names from that era were absent. Even so, the show didn't lose momentum. If anything, it gained even more intensity. The Arnold Sports Festival had always been known for blending bodybuilding with high-level entertainment. That year, the presence of WWF star Chyna brought even more attention to the event, expanding its reach beyond hardcore bodybuilding fans. And it didn't stop there. The festival featured performances from elite Olympic-level gymnasts, creating a fascinating contrast between raw strength, sculpted aesthetics, and artistic movement. It was a full celebration of the human body in its many forms. The Arnold wasn't just a contest. It was a festival of physical excellence. Behind the scenes, another key detail helped cement the legacy of that night: the extensive coverage by GMV. Cameras captured everything: the pump room, the moments before stepping on stage, detailed photo shoots, exclusive backstage interactions. That footage helped preserve the event in vivid detail, allowing fans to revisit every angle of that historic night even decades later. The 2001 Arnold Classic wasn't just another title on Ronnie Coleman's resume. It was the definitive confirmation of what many call the mass monster era. From that point forward, the standard shifted. It wasn't enough to be big. It wasn't enough to be shredded. You had to be outrageously big and outrageously conditioned at the same time. And Ronnie proved that combination was possible. The level of conditioning on display that night pushed the sport into a new dimension. Deeply striated glutes, extreme quad separation, dense, three-dimensional back development. What once seemed exceptional became the new benchmark. From then on, countless athletes chased that look. The Arnold Classic itself also gained a new level of prestige. Until then, the Mr. Olympia was widely seen as the unquestioned pinnacle of the sport. But when a dominant reigning Olympia champion stepped into the Arnold and presented that kind of physique, the event's status skyrocketed. With 6-figure prize money, a world-class lineup, and unmatched production value, the Arnold became nearly equal to the Olympia in terms of relevance and respect. And when you look at the full lineup, Ronnie Coleman, Chris Cormier, Dennis James, King Kamali, Dexter Jackson, Craig Titus, it's easy to see why 2001 is often mentioned as one of the strongest lineups in history. Even without names like Flex Wheeler and Lee Priest, the level was brutal. This wasn't just a contest. It was a showcase of the absolute elite of global bodybuilding. Today, more than 2 decades later, the 2001 Arnold Classic is still revisited, debated, and constantly compared to other iconic shows. For many fans, that was Ronnie Coleman at his absolute best, his most complete, most balanced, most unstoppable version. Others argue it marked the true peak of the extreme mass era, the moment when size and conditioning collided at a level the sport had never seen before. And when you step back and look at everything that happened that night, the historic stakes, the legendary lineup, the conditioning, the controversy later that year at the Olympia, the generational moment on stage with Arnold and Reg Park, it's hard to deny how special it really was. So now the question shifts to you. Looking at the full picture, do you believe 2001 was truly the greatest Arnold Classic of all time?